Without a shadow of a doubt, it's the Cronkite Show in social media history. I want to welcome you to another episode of Dirty Politrickz. I got my man Chuck Mall in the building, Aubrey Taylor in the building, and our distinguished guest tonight, Texas State Representative Harold Dutton. And I am the five-star general. Mr. Dutton is not in Washington, D.C., so the question is why. We're going to talk about a few things. So y'all might want to get the popcorn because it's going to be interesting. Let's get to it, man. Say, man, I want to welcome you to another episode of Dirty Politrickz. And on behalf of my co-host, Chuck Mall and Aubrey Taylor, we want to welcome you to the show. And tonight we have one of my favorite legislators, Mr. Harold Dutton, on the show tonight. Look like it's been a firestorm of some things involving Mr. Dutton that we're going to clear up tonight. And Mr. Dutton knows one thing, just like every other guest, that seat get a little hot sometimes. So whether they my friends, I like them or not, I keep it 100, and we just going to get down to it. Say, how you doing today, Chuck and Aubrey?
Doing good. I appreciate you doing the show again.
Aubrey, what's going on, my friend?
Man, I'm not doing too good, dude. We'll get to it in a minute.
Okay, well, it's going to be all right. You breathing. So as long as you breathing, you having a good day. Mr. Harold Dutton, how you doing, my brother?
Hey, man, I'm doing wonderful. How about yourself? And thank you for allowing me to come on here. But I'm doing okay. Like everybody else, there are hills and valleys in your life, but you managed to persevere. And so, hey, that's kind of one of the things I learned in growing up in Fifth Ward. You just keep going.
Well, I tell you what, we're going to dive straight into it. You know, one of the biggest issues in the country right now is voter suppression or voter integrity. It just depends on what side of the ball that you're on. I know about a month ago, maybe 3 weeks to a month ago, you had some Texas Democratic legislators that walked out of the Capitol so that they would not have a quorum to vote on the voter integrity laws. And at that moment, I think that you didn't walk out with them. And then they decided to hop a plane and go to D.C. And I think initially you went and then you came back. Yes. Can you tell the people what actually happened so they can get a full scope of what went down?
Well, thank you for the question. Let me just explain what happened. I was in Houston, and I get this call and from the Democratic caucus chair. And he's letting me know what's going on. They're going to get on a private plane here from Austin, and they're going to go to D.C. and to break the quorum. The quorum requirements are you have to have at least 100 votes in the House for the House to do any business. And so if 50, we have 150 members, but if 51 or a greater number leave, obviously we don't have a quorum. And so I said, well, look, I can't get there in time that the plane was scheduled to leave. I'll tell you what, I'll get a plane from Houston to DC. And so by the time I could do that, rather than Saturday, it was Monday morning, I think, or Sunday night, I can't remember. So I flew to DC and I stayed in DC on my own dime, of course, in the same hotel with them. And I made several of the rounds to talk to members on the Congress. But I have a sister at my house. She is from Phoenix. I talked her into coming to Houston because she had developed a case of cancer. She lived in Phoenix. And I said to her, well, look, if I got cancer, there's no place I'd rather be than Houston at MD Anderson. She said to me, well, okay, let her check. She checked and she said the hospital here says they're an affiliate of MD Anderson. I said, sweetheart, let me tell you something. I wouldn't be at an affiliate. I would be at MD Anderson. And she said, okay, well, Harold, if I come, can I stay with you? I said, sure. You're always welcome here. Don't worry, and I'll be available to get you from where you need to be. So she came to Houston, and as it turned out, I went on to DC, and I told her she didn't have a chemotherapy treatment until I was getting back. But while I was in DC, she called me and she said, and this is what happened. She called me and said, the garage door opener that I left with her to get in and out of the house was not working. And so she could open the garage door, but she couldn't close it with the opener. And I said, oh God. Well, I said, look, I was going to come home just to check on you anyway. And so when I decided to come home, while I was at the airport, I found out that several members of the delegation had developed COVID. Now, part of the things about my sister is this, is she was having trouble with her white blood cell count because of the chemotherapy treatments. And because of that, she was highly prone to infections. And so at that point, I thought, well, I had planned to go back to DC, but at that point I decided, no, I just can't, I can't go back. If I go back to DC, I can't hang out with them because I'm afraid when I do come home, I'll bring something to her. And so that's essentially what happened. And so I decided to stay in Houston. While in Houston, I was thinking, you know, rather than just stay here, why don't I go to Austin and see if I can start the conversation with the other representatives, particular persons who were carrying the bill, House Bill 3. And why don't I go and I'll call him and see. So I called him and he said, Harold, if you come here, I'll certainly be glad to talk to you. And so that's what I did. I came to Austin, and not the day I came, but 2 days later, Representative Murr and I were able to sit down with two other colleagues who were on the committee. And we sat down in my office for about 2 hours, and because I went through each section of the bill, and I talked to him about the bill from my perspective. As I told my colleagues back in DC, I was not representing them or representing anybody in my conversations. I was representing myself, and that's what I did. And so he and I had a pleasant conversation about it. There were things I talked to him about that was in the bill. And I believe he understands now, at least from my perspective, what some of the major problems were with the bill. And so that's where I am. I'm in Austin today, but I'm headed back to Houston tomorrow.
Arbor Chuck?
Mr. Dutton, the line that's been pushed in the media is that these Texas bills, these voter integrity bills, are racist, and they're as bad as Jim Crow laws 100 years ago. So, what do you hold that thought, or and if so, what in this is as bad as Jim Crow laws?
Well, let me talk about the bill itself. There are different parts of the bill that people have zero in on that causes, depending on the words, you might see one thing, but if you look behind the words, you see something else. Let me talk about it from the standpoint of, for instance, the bill creates poll watchers, and it creates poll watchers such that poll watchers on election day have greater authority than the precinct judge.
May I stop you there?
Sure.
I've seen nothing. I've read the bill. I've seen nothing where it makes poll watchers have authority over the election official running that precinct.
Well, listen to what I'm saying. I'm not saying they have authority over the precinct judge. They have greater authority than the precinct judge. And let me tell you why I say that. Because what happens is, if the poll watcher does, well, let me back up a minute, because I think if you read the bill, you'll understand this. Poll watchers are there based on the bill to discover or make sure there are no irregularities that occur at that polling place. You understand that to be the reason for poll watchers being there?
Yeah, and okay. So.
But wait a minute. Wait just a minute. If a poll watcher is not trained and just somebody off the street, how would they know an irregularity from a donut? They wouldn't. And so the bill, as I said to the author, the bill, if you're going to have poll watchers to do all the things that you suggested they ought to do in this bill, the poll watchers certainly ought to have some kind of education that's provided by the Secretary of State. They ought to be at least determined who they are 30 days before an election. They ought to be taught in Texas law so they'll know what irregularities they're looking for. But I think the way the bill is drafted now, and the bill author somewhat didn't agree with me, but he certainly recognized that was a problem, and indicated that there was going to be some changes so that poll watchers wouldn't be just some guy off the street who was a heavy who went into a polling place and decided he was going to do this or that. It would be people who had the education about Texas law to discover the irregularities.
Now can I jump in on that real quick?
Sure.
But because I think you're pushing words around a little bit. Poll watchers have been around for 100 years in Texas, so they didn't change and create poll watchers, and there wasn't poll watchers before. No. So training, I would agree with you. I would agree with you that I'm okay with more training for poll watchers, but you're making it seem as though poll watchers just came up in this bill.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
All this bill does is make it harder for the election official there to push them out of a room and push absentee ballot boxes around. That's what this bill does.
Well,
so it's not creating poll watchers out of thin air.
No. I don't mean to suggest, if I did suggest that they were just the bill was creating poll watchers, I don't want to suggest that. What I want to suggest is that what it does is creates authority for poll watchers far beyond what they did have. Now it says a poll watcher who creates a problem in a polling place on election day gets basically what we give dangerous dogs, 2 bites at the apple. Because if the precinct judge, if the poll watcher does it a first time and violates the law or does something illegal at the polling place, what the bill provides is that the precinct judge now has to give them a warning. And for the second time, what the bill says is that the precinct judge actually has to witness them engaging in the illegal conduct. Now,
well, I mean, that's with anything. I mean, you can't just make up that somebody did something. You do have to observe it. So that's in common law.
Well, not really.
And so the poll watchers can't break the law. This law doesn't allow them to break any laws.
Well,
they can still be arrested and thrown out for breaking laws. It just makes the election judge have to prove up and not just say, you know what, I don't like you, Harold, so I'm going to shove you out of this.
If it just said prove up, that would be fine, because you can prove up things based on what somebody else saw. Under the bill, you're not allowed to prove it up based on what somebody else saw. It specifically says that the precinct judge had to witness the conduct. That's what part of the problem is. And if the precinct judge has to witness it, well, the precinct judge is overrunning the election. If somebody comes to her and says, look, this poll watcher back here is doing all kinds of, I'll tell you another problem with the poll watchers. What it does is it says poll watchers have the freedom to roam around the polling place. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean, and it says they have to be within sight and sound of the voter. Well, what does that mean? How close is that? Does that mean you get to look over a voter's shoulder? No, I don't think so. My mother and dad were precinct judges, and for a combined total of probably close to 50 years. And I used to go to the polling place with them, and I'd help set up and do all of that. And we had poll watchers. I remember my dad having poll watchers, and my dad would typically say, look, where would you like to sit? And the poll watcher would say, I'd like to sit right here. So my dad would say, okay, come and sit right here. Now, what I want you to do is sit here so you can observe, so that anything that happens, you'll be within earshot and eyesight of that. So, now, but to allow poll watchers to wander around the polls, come on, That's not.
Well, I think there's a reason for that. Okay.
Right.
So if I'm the precinct judge, and let's say, well, first I'll start with, are poll watchers only Republicans? Or can every candidate can have a poll watcher, correct?
This bill doesn't say anything about Republican or Democrat.
Okay, exactly. So Democrats can have as many poll watchers and roam around too. Now, I
don't think that makes it right, because Democrats.
Well, hold on, but it doesn't make it racist. It doesn't make it racist.
Well,
so in other words, there's no racism to this.
Well,
and the reason for this is, as you saw in Philadelphia in 2020, they made the Republican poll watchers sit in the far corner of a large warehouse. That's so cheating could go on out of their view. That's the reason for this law.
Well, this bill doesn't help Philadelphia. This bill is
no, it helps Harris County and Texas, and I don't want it to happen here.
Well, it hadn't happened before, and so
it did. I'll correct you there. It did happen at NRG. I have 2 affidavits from poll watchers that were shoved out of the way. So Longoria with Harris County, so Longoria had one of her assistants push absentee ballot box in a room out of view. That's so dirty work could be done out of the view of the poll watchers.
Well, that's an assumption on your part about the dirty work. I'm not sure that we have evidence.
Well, if it was honest, why did it happen in the dark then?
Well, I don't, just because it happened outside the view of a poll watcher doesn't make it illegal or suggest that something illegal happened. I'm not sure. I wasn't there. I don't know the circumstances, but I can tell you this, that when you go back to the bill, what you begin to see is that, for example, there were things done in Harris County. For example, the drive-through voting, the 24-hour voting. Let's look at that. The 24-hour voting, guess who used that more often, or the drive-through voting? Guess who used that more often than anybody? Females. 60% of the drive-through voting was done by females. Now, why? Well, because for females, a lot of females who have jobs and have families, they could go vote if they could take their whole family with them, if they take their kids with them in the car, and they could do that. I suspect there were certain things that were available to them because that's why it happened. This bill takes that away. This bill says that the only drive-through voting you can have, or voting in a vehicle, has to do with being disabled.
And do you know? And so I'll throw in about that drive-through voting.
Right.
My mother and father have passed away, but if my dad could have sat in the vehicle while my mother was voting, she would have voted whatever he told her to vote. Okay, that's the reason. That's the reason a vote is an individual activity. That's the reason husbands are not allowed to force their wives into voting for who they think that should be voted for. So I think individual voting helps more women than the allegation that it's going to help out 100 women to vote. I mean, they can still go inside and vote.
Well, you're presupposing that. I would bet you, and I don't have any evidence of this, but I would bet you 90% of the couples vote the same way anyway. There's very few households where the wife votes one way and the husband votes another way. I would suggest to you, and I'd be willing to almost bet my house that occurs, because in my house, that's the way it happened. In my dad's house, that's the way it happened. My mother voted the same way he did, and he voted the same way she did. I don't ever remember a case where they were in opposition or canceled each other out based on a vote. And so you're suggesting that because the people who voted in the car would have somebody in the car telling them how to vote, I think that's pretty far-fetched. I think. So
you think domestic disputes, violence in Harris County doesn't happen?
Well, I thought we were talking about voting.
Well, that's what I'm saying. In other words, the reason you have an individual vote, in other words, we don't allow people to go in a polling location and the whole family goes and sets in line in the same machine and votes together, right, is because it's an individual act. We don't want anybody to influence them.
Right.
We don't want their husband. We don't want their wife.
And
We don't want a neighbor influencing them while they're voting. They can tell them beforehand or
right.
after.
And it's awfully presumptive of you to assume that it happens in a car. There's no
Well,
evidence that happened.
So you don't know. You weren't. In other words, you don't know either. You're making assumptions.
Well,
you're accusing me of making assumptions. You're making assumptions.
Well,
okay. Let's try this here. Aubrey, you got a question? I can't hear you, Aubrey. Unmute your microphone, please.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, not really right now, man. I'm really not into the to the 24 into the 24-hour deal.
All right. Well, I will say this here about 24-hour voting. I'm not for it. I monitored polls in the election, and I didn't really see people voting all night long. And I sat out there from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. And it is what it is. Now that created a firestorm with you coming back, and you've explained why you had to come back because of your sister,
right?
And then of course the COVID, and I get it. I really get it.
Right.
But here's the question: you're being attacked by members of the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats, mainly Candace Matthews. I refuse to put the doctor in front of her name. It doesn't exist to me. And I really think that it's personal. I think that they want somebody in your seat. And we know, and Chuck and Aubrey, we know that the race Mr. Dutton was in, there was some fraud in that race with a ghost candidate. There was some fraud in that race with a ghost candidate, a candidate that didn't exist. But my question is, do you know anything as to why these people are attacking you? And I'm just gonna throw this out here.
Right.
They're attacking Harold Dutton, but they're not attacking somebody, say like John Whitmire.
Yeah.
But they're attacking Harold Dutton.
Well, let me say this. When the last mail out that people got in my district came from, it said it came from one organization, but if you read it real well and you read the postscripts on it, it came from AFT, the American Federation of Teachers. And that's where it came from. That's where much of this lies. And I will tell you, it's because I would not change my attitude in regards to whether HISD ought to let a school campus stay failing for 5 consecutive years without being subjected to the state possibly taking it over.
Let's talk about that, because there's a backstory to that.
Right.
There's a backstory to that. But you're here tonight, so you can kind of clear it up. Oh, he fell off. Hold on a second. Let me add him to the stream. There you go, Mr. Dutton. All right, there we go. There's a backstory to the HISD thing and the Houston Federation of Teachers. What happened when you either reached out to Terry Greer, who was the superintendent, or you tried to have a conversation with him? What happened?
Well, let me start. Thank you for the question. Let me tell you what happened. I've been on the public education committee in the House for 34 years, longer than anybody ever has. I have followed particularly, and I've asked to be on public education all those years because I could detect that the schools in Northeast Houston, along came the late 80s, early 90s, middle 90s, the student outcome had been going almost in the tank in terms of all of the schools. And so I started looking at it, and I proposed a bill that said HISD was going to be divided into 4 subparts. Each subpart would elect their own superintendent, because I thought that means somebody's got to pay attention to the schools in Northeast Houston. Well, that bill failed. And so along came later on, what I did is I sponsored a bill that said we were going to put all of the schools that were failing in one cluster, in one district, and have the state run the whole district. Well, that bill failed. And so I was looking at Cashmere High School, and I looked at Cashmere and I said, wow, Cashmere has been failing for 7 consecutive school years. And I wondered why. So I went and I looked at the STAR test they were taking, and they had not done well on the STAR test because they never did well on the math portion of the standardized test. So I asked Terry Greer to meet with me, and Terry Greer came to meet with me because I was concerned about Kashmir. And I said, look, Mr. Superintendent, can you tell me why Kashmir is failing for all these years? He said, well, Harold, I'm glad you asked me, because what I did is I went and took a look, and they didn't do well on the math portion of the standardized test. I said, no, sir, that's not what I'm asking you. What I'm asking you is, why did they do well on the standardized test in math?
He didn't have any certified math teachers in the school.
That's exactly what he didn't know that. He told me, well, he didn't know why that happened. I said to him, well, look, I went back and looked, and for almost 20 years, Kashmir students never had a certified math teacher. And he looked at the guy with him and he said, is that true? I said, sir, I got the information from the Texas Education Agency. And so if it's not true, their data is wrong. He then said to me, well, why is that? I said, well, look, what I did is I went to the school board members and I said to them, and this was school board members who didn't represent the area of Kashmir. That school board member said to me, well, look, you need to talk to the school board member in your area. I said, no, sir, I'm talking to you. You might get elected in a certain district, but you represent all of HISD. And if something happens on my side of town, that's something you need to take care of also. He assured me he couldn't do that. He was just going to take care of the west side of town. I said, okay. I went to the chairman of the House Public Education Committee at that time, a guy named Jimmy Don Aycock. And I said, look, here's what the problem is. We have 9 individual members represented by district in HISD in Houston. Somehow or another, I need to fix it so they all have some skin in the game when a campus is failing, particularly where it's been a consistent failure. He said, well, what would you do, Harold? I said, okay, here's what I would do. I would fix it so if a campus in a school district is failing, I said 3 initially, he made me change it to 5. If a campus is failing for 5 consecutive school years, the state has the right to come in and take over the whole district. He said, Harold, that ought to get their attention. I think they'll fix the campus then. I think that's what they'll do. So the bill passed in 2015. It passed in 2015 with the support of everybody, the NAACP, Houston, the Texas State Federation of Teachers, all of the other groups. Everybody was in favor of it until it happened. But the status of schools around Texas was that when that bill went into effect and that amendment went into effect, 4 years later, we have far fewer schools that have been failing consecutively in the state, except in HISD. Now we have Wheatley, who has been failing for 9, because they didn't get evaluated for 2 of them, but they've been failing for 7 consecutive school years. To me, that's a problem. 1 is I represent Wheatley, 2 is I graduated from Wheatley, and 3 is I know that there's nothing wrong with the children at Wheatley, but there's something wrong with what we're giving them. And that is true not only for Wheatley, but when I went and looked at all of the schools in Northeast Houston, I looked at the 2 middle schools that feed into Wheatley. They were having problems, failing. I went and looked at the elementary schools that were feeding into the middle schools. They were having problems for the most part, failing. And so to me, what I said is that, look, I need to do something about this. The Houston Federation of Teachers, when I went over and screened with them during the last election cycle, and a lady on the committee who was screening me said, Mr. Dutton, well, you don't understand something. I said, what is that I don't understand? She said, the parents on the side of town that you're talking about in terms of Westbury, in terms of all the schools in Southwest Houston, they have family income that's higher than the family income in Northeast Houston. I said, what does that have to do with it? That was always the case. When I went to school at Wheatley, I'm sure that area had a greater delta between the salaries of families on that side of town versus the other west side of town. So, but yet we learned. The first person I ever met who was a Fulbright scholar graduated from Wheatley, lived around the corner from me. And so being poor had nothing to do with us learning. And so when Houston Federation of Teachers met with me, they wanted me to change it so that the state wouldn't have the capability to take over a school district if it had one campus that was failing for 5 consecutive school years. I told them I wouldn't do that. I just declined to do that because I knew that if we let them off the hook, we would simply have more failing schools. People ask me, well, Harold, how do you know that the schools are going to be better if the state takes them over? I told them, honestly, I don't know whether they will or not. But what I do know is this. I know if they stay where they are, we're going to continue to get what we've been getting, and that is failing schools and disrupted neighborhoods and communities, because the extent to which the kid wants to get an education in Northeast Houston, they have to get on a bus to go across town to go to another school. Essentially what that does is destroys a community. And so I understand Federation of Teachers not wanting me to allow this to happen, but I respond more to the students than I will to the Houston Federation of Teachers.
Well, I'll say this here real quick. That one, I believe that if you give the kids what they need to succeed, then they're gonna go above expectations.
Yes.
It doesn't take 5 years for a school to stop failing. Now, if the Houston Federation of Teachers would do more for their members, which are their teachers that they represent, who have been wrongfully taken out of schools, the longer tenured teachers that knew how to teach, if they would get off their behinds and represent those teachers against this rogue school district, then we would have some qualified teachers in the classroom. Yeah. The Houston Federation of Teachers wants to control Harold Dutton the same way that they control Elizabeth Santos, the trustee. The Houston Federation of Teachers wants to control Harold Dutton the same way they control trustee Holly Marie Villaseca. Now, my thing is, and you know what's so crazy, y'all three? Charles, Aubrey, and Mr. Dutton. I went back to college 2 years ago on a 1986 diploma, not 21st century learning, and I'm walking circles around these kids in these classrooms because I got a decent education back in 1986. Well, they're not teaching these children.
Well, let me tell you this, and it's obvious too, because too many of our colleges and universities, even for the kids who are going to college, the colleges and universities complain because they have to do remedial courses for all the incoming freshmen. That is a huge problem. I said to HISD, one of the bills I had this time, which failed, well, it passed, but it passed without, because what I put in the bill was what's called outcome-based funding, where if school districts could improve a Title I student who had failed the 2019 STAR test, but they could get them so they were now going to be not failing, they were going to get $1,000 per student to do that. The people in the legislature, led by all the people who represent HISD, said they didn't like outcome-based funding. They didn't like outcome-based funding because that was going to be disruptive to students. And I said to them that no, HISD and the schools doing this like outcome-based funding because we pay them to educate all the kids, but if 25, 30% of the kids are failing, they need to give us the money back if they don't like outcome-based funding. The other thing I would point out here is that it was particularly noticeable to me that when HISD negotiated the new contract with his new school superintendent, guess what they had in the contract? Outcome-based funding for him. He can make up to $150,000 more a year if he improves student outcomes. Now, my point is, if it was good enough for him, why wouldn't it be good enough for the students? Why wouldn't it be good enough to put in House Bill 4545?
Well, if it was good enough for him, why wasn't it good enough for the last one, who got a lot of students out of failing?
Right.
Which didn't make sense to me. Aubrey, you had a question, my friend.
Oh, we can't.
Yeah, no, I didn't necessarily have a question. I was just scratching my head on that.
Yeah. Well, I've stood on the state capitol steps, and that was back in 2015 with Mr. Dutton fighting for a bill. I don't agree with Harold Dutton on every single bill, but a lot of bills I stand with him on it. And I believe that these schools can actually get these kids where they need to be. But we're wasting too much money, like the URSA funds. I think we got almost $2 billion in URSA funds. And they're spending, they're spending this money, Aubrey and Chuck, on programs. Hold on a second, man.
The state got $17 billion from the feds that had to go to public schools, the schools with Title I students. From my standpoint, I wished that the federal government had allowed us to put some kind of guidepost on the money. The federal government chose not to do that, said that we had to give the money to the school districts. The only thing I did is I passed a bill that said that school districts had to put on their website and had to disclose to the public and to the legislature how they intended to spend the money.
Well, I think y'all need to go back and look at how they intend to spend what you gave them, because it does not make sense. You have over 500 openings for teachers. We're going to start the year with a bunch of uncertified teachers again, and I believe in my heart that we will have double the amount of failing schools after this year that we've had before. I see it coming.
Well, let me put it this way. We had a number of kids. We had about 25% of the students in the state out of the 5.5 million students who were failing. That was before the pandemic. When the pandemic has hit now, the only thing that's happened is those 25, 30% of the students have now set a new bottom, and now we've had more kids go into the bottom. And so to me, that is a tragedy waiting to happen, because what's going to happen is, let me give you a stat. Between the years of age 18 to 25, Texas has almost 5 million people who don't have a high school diploma. Who don't, think about it, don't have a high school diploma. That's absolutely crazy. Because what that's going to portend is we're going to have some serious problems in this state for lack of people here who are educated. We are going to have to end up importing people into Texas to man the industries, the technological industries that are going to take place, because we won't have the capability to do that with the people we have. And what it also portends is we'll end up having a greater number of people who have to be on public assistance because they can't get a job in the tech industries that are going to be here. That's not a good look for any state, and certainly Texas. We've got so many things that we've got to correct in terms of the education outcomes of our students. Some people said, well, the pandemic caused us to have to do virtual learning, a lot of remote learning. I think these kids were doing more remote than learning anything. And the problem is that we haven't figured out how to do what we need to do at every school. But I said that, but the thing I will tell you is this. When Greer did one thing great, Mr. Monroe, He called me and said, Mr. Dutton, I'm going to have to close E.O. Smith. I said, well, I know you've been trying, because they added even an elementary school to E.O. Smith, which was junior high school, that I went to, as a matter of fact. But the enrollment had been declining. I said, well, look, what are you going to do with that building? You can't just leave that huge building up there with nothing in it. He said, well, I don't know. What do you think we ought to do with it? I said, let me think about it. That night I went to sleep, and almost out of the blue, it hit me. I remembered how I felt when I went to Morehouse College and I watched my son graduate at Morehouse College. And that Sunday morning when I watched these 550 males come running across this burn to the beat of these African drums, these 550 black males who were getting a college diploma. I said to him, wow, that's what we need to do. We need to create an all-boys school. So I called Superintendent Greer back and I told him we needed to do that. He asked me, he said, well, can you do the one-gender schools? I said, yes, sir. Reverend Bill Lawson and some other people had gone to D.C. to get them to change the law. The law had been changed to that effect so that you could do that. As a result, they created the Mickey Leland Preparatory School at HISD. And you want to know something about that school? It is the top school in HISD. So I know they know how to make a school great. So the only question I have is why? Why do you let Kashmir fail? Why do you let Wheatley fail? Why do you let...
Because they really want them closed.
Well, as a matter of fact, when I talked to the TEA commissioner, when there was a conversation about whether HISD would be taken over by the state, a whole bunch of them came here to tell the TEA commissioner to just close Wheatley.
Whoa, see, people don't know that.
Yeah, I know it. And that's when the commissioner called me. He and I had a conversation. He said he's not going to let that happen. I said to him,
now what you done did is you done dropped Hiroshima, because a lot of people don't know that the same people that's out here advocating supposedly for our schools is
right,
sneaking behind the scenes to the TEA commissioner trying to get him to close Wheatley.
That's right. And I said to him, I said, Mr. Commissioner, what did the building have to do with it? What did the building have to do with it? The building didn't have anything to do with it. So if you close the school, what does that get you? I mean, that's kind of like having weeds or something in your garden, and then you decide to just spread them all around. Well, that doesn't help. It helps when you can cause every student who shows up at the front door of a school that we ought to be in the position to unlock the genius in that child. We ought to do something that changes that child's future. I think one of the reasons we've got this huge problem with these juveniles doing all kinds of crazy things that we read about in the paper is because we haven't helped them create options in their lives. The limited options they have lead them down to doing some of these crazy things they're doing. But if we taught them, if we helped them get educated, I will tell you this, I have come to realize among all the things I have read about public education, and I've read lots of things since being named chairman, I realized that from pre-K through third grade, you have to learn how to read. And the reason you have to learn how to read is because after third grade, you read to learn. If you don't ever get to the point where you learn to read, then you never get to the point where you can read to learn. And so as a consequence, you don't begin to learn. We have all these programs for ninth grade dropouts. I said, no, that's not when people drop out. That's when they left, but that's not when they dropped out. They dropped out in third grade when you didn't teach them to read and you promoted them to fourth grade, they still can't read. You promoted them to fifth grade, they still can't read. And so as a consequence, they hang around till ninth grade and then they leave because they realize that school is not for them.
Well, I tell you what, let's switch gears because one of the hottest topics in the country is transgender with sports.
Right.
And once again, that organization, Texas Coalition of Black Democrats, tried to censor you.
Yes.
Because of a controversial bill. So can you tell the people about that bill and what actually happened?
Well, what's crazy about that is these people who were advocating on the other side should have been thanking me. Let me tell you why. When the bill came up in my committee as chair of public education, I told my committee members, I have a 13-member committee, including me. I said, look, if we have 7 votes for any bill, I'm going to bring it up. And I told them this way when I got to be the chair. One of the things I thought is that we need to be careful about voting for bills, but if you got 7 votes for it, I'm going to bring it up. The guy who was sponsoring the transgender bill came to me and said, I've got 7, here's my 7 votes. I looked at it, I thought, okay, you got the 7 votes, I'll bring it up. The first time I brought the bill up, Dan Huberty, who was one of the 7 members to vote for it, I thought he had gone to get a cup of coffee, which was in the little coffee room, and he would be back. He had actually exited the building. And so when I brought the bill up, the bill failed because there were only 6 votes for it now. Not including me, because I had voted, there were 6 votes for it, there were 5 votes against it, and 1 vote president not voting. I was voted president not voting. When Dan Huberty came back later that evening, he said to me, he said, Harold, why did you bring the bill up? I said, well, Dan, I thought you were still here. I didn't know you were gone. I promised him I would bring the bill back up a second time. Now, during that time, though, I had a meeting with him and some other members of the committee. And I said to them, well, let me ask you all this. How big is this problem we're trying to cure? How big is it? How many students does it affect? They said, we don't know. What I had done, though, is I had called over to the University Interscholastic League, which governs all the extracurricular activities in Texas for students. And they had a rule already. They had a rule that said you had to play according to your birth certificate. That's what the bill said. I mean, that's what the rule said for UIL. I asked him, how long had the rule been around? They told me 5 years. I said, well, how did the rule come into play? He said, well, the school districts, when we ever have a rule like that, we give it up to school districts and they vote for it. He said 80%, I think 87% of the school district voted for the rule. So that's why the rule is there. I also asked him, well, have you had any complaints about the rule? Have you had anybody filing a lawsuit or complaining about it? He said, nope, we've never had any challenge to the rules whatsoever. So I said, okay, thank you. I convinced the members of the committee to take all the stuff they had in the transgender bill out and simply put in to codify the UIL rule. I also asked them to put in the bill, which they did. They put 2 other things. They put in there that that UIL should do a study on this issue and a drop dead date for the bill at 2027. I made the 2027 date only because I didn't want to push them to engage in a hurried up study, but to do an actual study. So that's what got into the bill. When that got into the bill, it came up. I told Dan Huberty I would bring the bill back up whenever we had the next meeting. Well, the next meeting occurred because Alma Allen I had a bill that would have, the practical reality was it would have allowed the takeover HISD to go forward. And it would have done that. Alma Allen basically found a procedural mistake in the bill and killed the bill. Well, I had to get the bill back up the next day, and so I had to have a hearing. Well, the sponsors of the transgender bill said, well, Harold, if you're going to have a hearing, you promised that we would have a hearing on the transgender bill whenever you had another hearing. I said, okay. So the 2 bills came together. Now, people were saying that I had put the transgender bill up the second time because I was mad because Alma Allen had killed the HISD bill. That couldn't have been further from the truth. That's not what happened. And for everybody who said something different, they weren't in the legislature. And so I invite them to talk to the members of the legislature, and they'd find out exactly what happened. But that is what actually happened. So when the bill came up, and finally what the process is, when a bill comes out of committee, it goes to what we call the calendars committee. The calendars committee had to schedule it to the floor. The bill that was voted on out of my committee was a Senate bill, Senate Bill 29. It then went to the calendars committee, who scheduled it to the House floor. What the bill did is we have a rule that Senate bills have to be heard by a certain date. It has House bills too, but Senate bills come later. So the bill was placed on the calendar on the same day that the Senate bills had to be heard by midnight. The Senate Bill 29 came up, and so it had caused so much rancor. I said, I'm going to be the sponsor of it. And when it came out of my committee, because since it was a Senate bill, as the chair of the committee, I get to decide who's going to be the sponsor of a Senate bill. And so I had told the two sponsors of the Senate bill that in the House that I would be the sponsor. And so I was the sponsor for the bill. And when it came up on the House floor, it came up about 10 o'clock or so that evening. Well, the bill has to be heard by midnight because it's a Senate bill, otherwise it dies. And so what I did is I decided, look, I postponed the bill from 10 o'clock to 11:30, and I did that. And the Democrats got up and talked against it for 30 minutes, and that eventually killed the bill. And that's what happened to Senate Bill 29. And so I don't know why the transgender community wasn't thanking me for doing that, because I didn't let the bill pass. That was the more egregious part of the bill. And simply what we were doing, what I got the committee to do, was to accept the fact that we didn't know how much of a problem this was or wasn't. We don't know how many kids it affected or how many kids it didn't affect. And so putting in the study was going to allow us to do that. But rather than do all that at the last minute, I decided my committee would probably take this up during the interim and take a look at it so that we could study. But anyway, that's essentially all the facts about what happened to trans.
Yes, sir. Mr. Dutton,
yes.
So you do or don't support boys in high school and junior high playing in girls' sports?
Well, as my district told me, boys ought to play with boys and girls ought to play with girls. And so that's where I am.
Okay. No, and I appreciate that. I have no problem with people being transgender. I have no problem if somebody said, hey, we want to start a third league where people can play. That's not a problem. But I don't think it's fair for boys to be able to play in girls' sports, because even if it's a minute percentage of boys that would do that, they'll still be at the 1 or 2% in the girls' sports. So in other words, if it's only 10 boys that do it in a group of 10,000 girls, they'll still be in the top 1% athletes in those sports.
I don't think it's fair if Mr. Dutton doesn't support it for people to automatically call him homophobic or transphobic. Well, I don't agree with that. And I agree with him. Boys should play boys sports and girls should play girls sports.
Well, and when people call me that, they don't realize that I have friends that cover the whole spectrum. There are people who are very close to me who cover the whole spectrum. I just think that we ought to take a look at this. My committee ought to take a look at it to see how best to deal with this.
Well, I'm going to say this here because it may make some people in that community upset. You don't get everything you want. Black folk don't get everything they want. Latinos don't get everything they want. LGBTQ, you ain't going to get everything you want. Well, and one of the things that we're going to stand firm on in the state of Texas is boys play boys sports and girls play girls.
Well, I
Did you
heard
guys
from
watch the?
well, the
Yeah.
comments
Did you guys watch the?
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Did you guys watch the 100-meter dash in the Olympics? Did you see the gold medal winner? She only ran 10.6, dude. We have boys in high school. I mean, high school from junior high who can run that fast, man. It'd be unfair to have males compete, and those are grown women. The world record was broken. So it's you know, it's that doesn't even be a question, man. It's unfair. It should happen. I mean, you pretty much know my stance on that. Again, you're taking opportunities away from women. All this.
You had your first trans wrestler win a gold medal. I want y'all to go find the picture of what they look like standing up on the podium. The trans wins the gold. The two women are at the bronze and the silver. Look how they look. It's not fair. It's just not fair. And that's something I believe in. It doesn't make me homophobic. I'm a state champion in football. Ain't no way we'd have let a girl play with us. It wasn't going to happen.
Well, and it also hurts girls if you go back to the education part of it. A lot of girls from disadvantaged households that don't have money to send them to college gets college scholarships based on sports. And if you took that away from them, I mean, that's just not fair. And Mr. Dutton, I really appreciate you being on here tonight. And I know my questions and a little pointed, but I like politics and I like talking about it. And I appreciate you talking with me about it.
Let's go back and revisit some. Mr. Dutton, here's a point blank question. The voter suppression or voter integrity laws, the bill that's there, is it worth, or do you think that your Democratic comrades need to come back home, do the job that the voters voted them in to do, which is go into the legislation battle? If they lose, you come back in 2 years, you battle again. Or should they stay in Washington and fight this battle the way that they're doing it?
This special session ends on Friday night. The governor has said he is going to call another special session. And if that one fails, he'll call another special session. So at some point, we've got to do this. Let me tell you what I have done. I have been talking to the people here about the bill. And I put it to you this way. One of the things I think we could all agree on is that access in the bill, access to voting, is limited. Now, whether that's fairly limited, whether it's unfairly limited, it's limiting because you don't get to do some of the things that, for example, you did in Harris County. So what I have said to them is, look, why don't you do this? Why don't we create a major access to voting by making voting for state and county offices a holiday? Why don't we make that a holiday so that everybody is off work? You can go vote that day. And when I talked to the sponsor of the bill, Andrew Murr, he looked at me and he said, Harold, that's interesting you said that because in my county, that's what we do. We have a county holiday and everybody goes and vote. I said, wouldn't it be great if we could make that a state holiday? And he is, the way I understand it, he is considering that, putting that in the bill. And so from my standpoint, if we get equal or greater access than we got now to voting, that's what we ought to be doing. And that's what we ought to be challenging everybody to do.
Aubrey or Chuck?
Yeah, Mr. Dutton. Okay.
I like that idea. I like that idea. Say, Rev Dutton. It sounds like a good idea to me. That's something I can get behind.
Yeah, Mr. Dutton, I would have no problem with that. And like I've said several times on this show, I have no problem. I have no problem with 100,000 more black people voting in Harris County. I just don't want two ballot harvesters deciding for 100,000 votes that didn't happen.
Well, I think that's something that's got to be cleared up. At least if there's just a perception of it, we need to clear that up. If it's the reality, we need to clear that up, because I don't think that anybody ought to be subject to a problem in the election. I certainly think that, for example, the two people who've been indicted that were in my race, I don't think they could have done that by themselves. I don't think so. I mean,
I was going to ask you, how was that going?
Well, I'm not sure. I haven't followed it much, but I know they've been indicted, but I'm not sure what's happened beyond that. I know COVID has slowed a lot of things down in the court, and I suspect it's also had an effect on that. But I think that just getting on the ballot, that, as I said to the author of the bill, of the election bill here, we ought to do something like we've done to make sure that the person is who they say they are when they go and vote. We ought to do that so that people on the ballot are who they say they are. And to the extent that we don't allow that, we allow something different, you're going to create a huge problem. And that's what happened in my race. I think
that happened in your race. We know that the GOAT candidate happened in your race.
Yes.
But something else I discovered was the actual address that Jared Davis used off of his driver's license was an empty field.
Well, that's something I also spoke to the author about, because the way the law works now, it says where you intend to reside is where you reside, is where you can vote, where you intend to reside. I'm not sure that.
Well, Jared might have wanted to reside there in a tent, because there wasn't no house there.
Well, the place where he used on Pickfair, where it was a house, just to prove that he didn't live there, I went over and put one of my yard signs in the front of it, and it stayed there. So, I mean,
go ahead, Aubrey.
I want to go back to the issue about indictments that you just mentioned. Yeah, right. I've actually done a little study, and I've actually looked at the document, the application, and I would challenge you and your people to perhaps, in a spirit of fairness, go in, look at that document that the state is saying had been tampered with by Bonton and the other young lady who was in that race, and look down at the bottom portion. The bottom portion, you're going to see a box that's checked that said that the voters, that information by the party. You're also going to see on the bottom line of that document, you're going to see two dates. One date you're going to see with slash marks in between it, and right next to it, what you're going to see is forward slashes at the bottom of that document. If you don't have a copy of it, I can get it to your office. That tells me something when I'm looking at that. No one individual is going to make those markings. At the bottom of that particular document that we're talking about, that Mr. Bonton and Natasha Deming supposedly tampered with, you're also going to see two different dates by the notary that notarized that particular paperwork. What that tells me is that there's something nefarious happened there. The dates are 30 days apart. You're also going to see at the bottom of that document is going to be a signature, which is a squiggly line that we cannot make out. We need to find out who the person was that signed that document. Only two people could have signed the document. At the bottom of it, that was supposedly notarized by Mr. Malikoff. That's going to be the Harris County Democratic Party chair, Libby Schechter, who stepped down. The person would have been a designee on her part. So what's today, man, is in a spirit of fairness, someone document was tampered with. What I'm going to submit here today was tampered with that particular document. That person who tampered with it was inside the Harris County Democratic Party. There's no way that those individuals could have done. And you notice I'm not using allegedly here. I'm telling you that there's no way that those individuals could have done that by themselves. So we need to get to the bottom of that. The DA needs to get on. There's a problem with that document. I would be willing to go down and sit down with whoever needs to be sit down with, whether it be you, whether it be the district attorney. There's a problem there. There's a reason why Lily Schechter stepped down. I published a series of reports where I used her signature. I showed the different varying signatures that the Democratic Party stepped down that she's used. So we've got a problem there. In a spirit of fairness, I haven't received a dime from Bonton or the young lady in the race, nor did I receive any monies from you or Jerry Davis or anybody in there. But my folks and I have looked at that particular document. I'm telling you, it was tampered with from someone or somebody's inside that Democratic Party.
Hold on, man. Go ahead, Mr. Dutton.
Yeah, and I've had lawyers take a look at that document, and they've raised the same points about it that you made. The same questions are in their mind, and that's why I think that I will tell you this. I also talked to a friend of mine who called me and said, Harold, I forgot to tell you this. Two of the candidates in your race, and they weren't, Miss Deming wasn't one of them, came to me some time ago and told me about this scheme they had about getting somebody in the race with a Hispanic last name. And I thought, what? He said, yeah, they came in to J&J's over on Homestead, bought my lunch, and then sat down with me and started telling me, and they didn't realize how close you and I were. And so the point I'm making is that I hope the DA will go beyond where she is to figure out everybody who was involved in this, including the other candidate and the Democratic Party, because I suspect that there was something far more, as you call it, nefarious going on than what meets the eye right now. And I don't want to see these two people take the fall for everybody who was a part of it.
I want to say something else here. The notary that signed off on that and put the date stamp on that particular information, not even a month prior or so, that's the same individual who in the court acknowledged that they'd made a mistake in that situation involving Judge George Powell. You remember the situation where supposedly he paid the wrong amount? This is the same individual, Mollenkoff, who's in there, who's involved in this particular situation, man. Something needs to be done, State Brother.
Yeah, it smells bad, and I suspect that I hope it invites a look by the DA's office to get to the bottom of it, because it just smells bad. And it looks funny. If there's nothing to it, I think I'd be accepting that after a complete investigation of it.
I think, and I done poured over it with a fine-tooth comb, I think somebody being set up. I think we got all these eyes on these two people when it really ain't them two people. And that in itself, and Mr. Dutton is not saying this, Aubrey or Chuck is not saying this, I think the DA know it. That's why she moving slow. It ain't them two people. It's somebody else. And they know who did it. But when you get to knocking them apples off the tree, ain't no telling what you gonna shake. Right. So I just think that it's a bunch of foolery. And just based on what happened in your race, that's another reason we need to clean this game up.
Yes.
We need to clean this game up from top to bottom. And you know, me and you, we done fought together.
Right.
Some bills I may not be with you on,
Right.
and voter integrity is something I believe in. It is something that I know. I don't see the suppression, but I know we were able to uncover which were violations of state and federal law. So I just tell everybody, they may be mad at me, but I can't be on the wrong side of this.
Right.
Not based on what I have in my possession that I can prove to be violations of election law.
Well, certainly the investigation now doesn't seem complete to me and to a lot of people, because there are too many still unanswered questions, that just don't make sense, because it's clear one thing is clear. These people could not have done that by themselves. That is absolutely the truth. I mean, to anybody, I don't care how they stand on the rest of it, but there's no way these people could make this happen by themselves. And so that invites a further inquiry, I think, by the DA's office.
Final thoughts, Chuck.
Mr. Dutton, anything I can do to help with the schools and improving education, I'm with you and Gary on that. So
thank you.
I really appreciate your effort.
Thank you, because it's important to all of us, man.
Yes, sir.
Final thoughts, Aubrey.
Yeah. State Rep Dutton, I disagree with the attacks that are coming up on you. I looked over the weekend at some stuff that was going on Facebook, and I denounced that for attacking you like that. And if you ever need my assistance, man, give me a call.
I'll do it, man. And thank you all too. Thank you, Gary. I understand you're getting out there, and I want to wish you the best, my friend.
We're gonna give them hell, Mr. Dutton.
Because I'll tell you, my mom used to always say, you can't make a good gumbo unless you stir it up.
Exactly.
And I don't think we'll get anywhere close to what we need to do for every student in this district unless we stir it up, because we've got too many people that are just acquiescing to the status quo, and the status quo won't work. If we keep doing what we've been doing, we'll keep getting what we've been getting. And nothing will change except our kids will be fodder for the criminal justice system. And that will be increased to the point where none of us can stay in our own neighborhoods. And so I thank you for it.
Well, I tell you what, man, we're going to give it a shot. I think those that know me know I'm no nonsense. I'm not going to play the game. I'm not getting into the game to get money. I don't want contracts. I don't want anything. I just want the kids to have a fair chance. I'm a Yates line. Phyllis Wheatley, I tell people, ain't no Yates without Phyllis Wheatley. So when they were threatening to close Wheatley, a Yates line was in the middle of the street on Providence Street with them Wheatley Wildcats. Because I was getting down for them kids.
And so, thank you for that, man.
My thing is, and here's one last subject. We got to touch this. What happened when Coretta Brown came to your office?
Who?
The girl that came to your office, I think it was last week, where you say they bombarded your office and you had to put them out?
Oh, I didn't know. I don't know what her name was, but yeah, she came. There was a lady came with 3 guys. And when they came in, I was sitting with my back to the door, just like I am now. And because I'm sitting in my office, and the lady at the front desk had gone to the ladies' room. And so she didn't stop them. She didn't let me know anybody was coming in. And so I heard somebody making a noise, and I turned around, and there these people were in my office. And then a guy, one of the guys with her, started to bombard me with questions. I said, ho, wait a minute, homeboy. Who are y'all? What do y'all want? Who is this? And so they did tell me their names. I must admit, I don't remember them. So I don't know Coretta Brown from anybody else. And so they started to ask me. I said, wait just a minute. Let me ask you all some questions that I ask everybody who come in here to ask me. first of all, who is your state representative? The guy who was doing the most talking said he didn't know. I said, well, look, I would suggest you go and talk to your state representative before you come and talk to me. I said, and the lady said her state, I can't remember who she said it was, but she said her state representative was somebody, and she was trying to help the other guy who was doing the talking. There was some heavy guy standing by the door, like he was the bouncer or something. And I was getting a little concerned because these people started, the way they approached me was kind of unusual and didn't say who they were, didn't tell me who they were. I remember they said they were from Houston. And I said, okay, well, what do y'all want? And they started talking to me about House Bill 3. My question to them was, have you read House Bill 3? And the answer was no. I said, well, look, you don't come and talk to me about a bill unless you've read the bill. Well, we want to know how you're going to vote on the bill. I said, well, that depends on a lot of things. What's in the bill? And since you can't tell me what's in the bill, how can I tell you how I'm going to vote for it? And and one of them started asking a question, and before I could answer that one, another one started asking a question, and then a third one started answering a question. I said, wait a minute. Why don't y'all go leave and come back when y'all in a better mood? Because I can tell y'all in the wrong mood to be in here. So get out. So I put them out of my office and told them, look, come back when you're in a better mood, but don't come back with that chip on your shoulder. But come back because everybody, that's the first time since I've been here in 36 years, I would put somebody out of my office. That's the very first time. And I don't know, she said her name was Coretta. You said her name was Coretta Brown?
Yeah.
I don't know her, but
today is just the day that Mr. Dutton gets to clear up some things, because anybody can go to Facebook and tell their story. That doesn't mean that it's true.
Well,
and I've never known you to be the type of guy to throw people out your office.
No, that's the only reason. I've had people in here who came in and introduced themselves and sat down and went at it like almost like the Crips and the Bloods. But that was the first time, I didn't feel threatened, but I felt that they were in here to cause a problem. And so that's why I asked them to leave and to come back when they were in a better mood, because clearly.
Okay. But you did tell them they could come back. So.
Yeah, I did. I said that to them. I said they could come back. I said, come back when you're in a better mood, because if you come back in the same kind of mood, I'm going to have the DPS come and put you out. Because I didn't like the attitude. And the guy standing by the door, I had to tell him too, he had to go.
Well, I tell y'all what, man, it's an honor to have worked with this guy. And like I'm telling y'all, we don't agree on every bill.
Well,
but the ones that we do agree on, we agree on them.
Well, let
me
say this, Gary. I appreciate the conversation, whether it's for me or against me. But the way you come at it, I really appreciate. Because I tell people all the time, I'm a public servant, not a perfect servant. And not being a perfect servant, I'll make mistakes, just like the regular people do. But I would be the first to admit it. I'd be the first to say, look, because I've had people come in here about a bill of mine. And, I'll tell you this quick story. Craig Washington and I lived together. And I had a bill that passed the House, and it went over to the Senate where he was in the Senate. And he said he was going to carry the bill. Well, somebody came to me and said he didn't like the bill. Now, he and I had just rode over to the Capitol together. And so I went over to the Senate and said, Craig, why don't you like the bill? I kicked him on the bottom of the shoe. He had his feet crossed. And he got mad about it and stood up. And we kind of stood nose to nose almost. And so we decided to come together to see if we could work out the bill. And as a consequence, that bill is what became a more perfect bill, because he disagreed with it and I disagreed with him. But we were able to sit down and talk about it, even though, like I said, we lived together and we rode over to the Capitol together. And so having a conversation about a bill and talking about it doesn't mean you have to agree with it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the other person is saying. But it does mean that sometimes if you will listen, sometimes you learn things about a bill or about what the author intends for the bill to do and what you want to do. And sometimes you can create a marriage, even though it's a shotgun marriage, so that you get to a point where it's better for Texas. And that's why I appreciate the opposition. Everybody in my district doesn't agree with me. They don't agree with me on some things, but we're able to talk about it to get to a point where we can do something about it so that it affects better on Texans.
Well, I tell y'all what, man, it's been an honor to have State Representative Harold Dutton on the show. And you know what it is, man. We keep it 100. I think he's presented his case. And I look forward to these guys coming back in one of these special sessions, going in there, sitting down. And I'm going to ask you one final question, Mr. Dutton. It's just a yes or no question.
All right.
In order to be a good politician, you have to work both sides of the aisle. Is that a yes or no?
That's a yes, particularly when the other side has the majority.
Exactly. So we need our people to come home. We need them to get into the state capitol. They need to battle. If they don't accomplish the goal this time, you go back in 2 more years, you do what you need to do.
Right.
That's all it boils down to. We got to get ready for redistricting. A lot of these people have to get ready to campaign because they got to run again. So we need to get home and we need to go to work, man. It's time to go to work.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me on here.
No problem. So, yo, guys, it's a reason we the best in the business. Dirty Politrickz, man, on a Wednesday night, YouTube and Facebook. On behalf of my good friends Chuck Mahler, Aubrey Taylor, I am the 5-star general. Doesn't say if you come to his office with that foolishness, he gonna have DPS to put your ass out. Keep playing. You gonna end up in the penitentiary. Not the penitentiary, but the penitentiary. Until tomorrow, man. Big 50, the Hood CNN. We'll holler at you.